In this video, we will look at how we can select data from multiple tables instead of only one table. To be able to perform that, we'll be using the SQL join operation. So what we will cover today is how we can use joins and what are actually joins, and how do inner joins work. And then we'll see how we can apply that in the Oracle Developer tool and use SQL commands to perform inner joins in there. So a join, from its name, it allows me to join more than one table, which basically combines rows from two or more relations. Now, joining this data is actually one of the most important strengths of the relational database. So instead of storing all my data in one table, I was able to store them in multiple tables. So this will allow me to reduce the redundancy of data. But when I wanted to retrieve data, I can actually get this data from multiple tables at the same times. There are two main types of joins, the inner join and the outer join, and today we'll be looking at the inner join. So let's look at how inner joins work. Let's assume we have these two tables. I have a course table that stores information about my course, including the course ID, the name of that course, and then the ID of the instructor who is teaching that course. I also have an instructor table which has the instructor ID, their name, and their office. Now, when we designed this database or these tables, we said that our primary key for the course was the course ID, and then we had a foreign key, which is the instructor ID in that table. Remember, the foreign key is actually mapping to another table, which is in here, the instructor table, where the instructor ID is actually a primary key. So we map the foreign key to a primary key in another table, and this is how I make the connection between these two tables. Now, when I want to join these tables, basically what I'm doing, I'm saying that both these columns are actually the same, and I want to place both of these tables on top of each other using that column. So what we are actually doing, we are going to place the course table on top of the instructor table using the instructor ID. So now I have a full table that has all the information that I need. The course ID, the name, the instructor ID, and then the name of that instructor and the office of that instructor. So using the join operation, we are just joining these two tables into one big table only for retrieving the information. We are not changing anything on the structure of our database, but for the purpose of retrieving data from our tables, we are just joining these tables into one big table to be able to get all the information that we need about the course or the instructor that teaches that course. Now, when we do the inner join, we are only getting the data that is present in both tables. So if we have a course that does not have an instructor ID, so the instructor ID was null in the course table, we will not be adding that course to our joined table. So we are only getting the data that is present in both tables. So we are doing an intersection between these two tables, and we are only displaying the intersection between these two tables. So let's look at the syntax in SQL. One way to do the join operation is to use the where condition. So I'm selecting all the rows and columns from, instead of one table, now I'm selecting from more than one table. To be able to do that, I'll list the table name, the first table name, comma, the second table name. If I have more than two, I can separate them with commas, so I can have as many tables as I want here, up to 256 tables. Now my condition will be to make the foreign key in table 1 equal to the primary key in table 2. So I'm only displaying the data where the foreign key in table 1 is equal to the primary key in table 2. So any value that is null in table 1 in the foreign key column, since the primary key in table 2 cannot be null, it will not be displayed. And if I have an instructor that is not teaching a course in the previous example, this instructor will also not be displayed because we do not have a foreign key value in that course table. So if we have the same name, for example, in both tables for that column that they have in common, in that case, we'll be needing to use the dot notation. So the dot notation, I'll list the table name dot the column name. So this way I can uniquely identify that column and know which table this column belongs to. So let's look at some examples. This is my sample database for the Justly bookshop. And now we will be able to use these connections between these tables. So if I wanted to display, for example, the publisher of a book, I see that I have a connection between the book and the publisher table. So you'll notice that the publisher ID is actually a foreign key here in the books table, and I'll be able to use or join these two tables when I'm using my select operation. So if I wanted to display the name of the publisher for a specific book, I can get the name of the publisher using that connection. So I can join these two tables on the publisher ID. So I'll be placing these tables on top of each other, and I can get, for any book, I can get the publisher name, their contact, and their phone number. So let's try that on the Oracle Developer Tool. I'm selecting all the columns and rows from the books table, and this is the result of my select query. Now notice I have, again, a publisher ID. If we go and select all the columns and rows from the publisher table, so publisher, that will display all the columns and rows from the publisher table, and I have the publisher ID. So if you remember from our ER diagram, we have a connection between them. So the publisher ID, which is a primary key here, is actually a foreign key in the books table. So to be able to join these two tables, I can select from books, comma, publisher. So I'm selecting data from both these tables. And then my condition, I want to make sure that the publisher ID is equal to the publisher ID. Now, since they have the same name, I will be needing to use the dot notation. So books.publisher ID, I want it to be equal to publisher.publisher ID. So in this case, I'm joining these two tables, and I'm only retrieving the rows that have a value in the books table, and they have a matching value in the publisher table. So we are retrieving all the rows where the publisher ID in the books table is equal to the publisher ID in the publisher table. So if we run this query, you'll see that we are retrieving the information about the book, all the columns in the book, and I'm also getting all the information about the publisher. So I'm getting the title of the book, and I'm also getting the name of their publisher in here. If you do not want to display all the columns, so for example, you only want to display the title for the book, and then comma the name, which is the publisher name, this will display the title of the book and the name of the publisher. Now, to avoid confusion, again, we try to use the dot notation, so books.title, so we know that the title column is actually coming from the books table, and then publisher.name, so we know that the name is coming actually from the publisher table. So we are displaying the title of the book and then the name of the publisher. When we are storing the data in the database, we are not storing them in the same table. However, we were able to retrieve the data using the join. We joined using the where statement. So we said we are retrieving the data only when we know the publisher ID. Notice I was able to get 14 books because I know the publisher for all the books in my books table. Now we do not have to limit our condition or where condition to only to do the join operation. We can have another condition. So for example, if we wanted to display the books where the publisher name, or let's say the publisher name in this case, so publisher dot name was equal to a specific value. So for example, printing is us. So in this case, we have the first condition, which is joining these two tables, and then we have our other condition. We want to only retrieve the books where the publisher was, printing is us. So if we run this query now, we'll see that we are only retrieving two rows, which are the two books that were printed with the publisher, printing is us. Now, instead of using the full table name in our where condition to specify where the column is coming from, we can give our tables some aliases. Now, this alias will improve the processing efficiency, and we will not need to identify which table is a column coming from. So this will make my code shorter, and then the table alias will be used to tell me which column or which table this column is coming from. Now, once you assign a column alias in the from clause, you must be using that anytime you want to reference that table. You cannot use the table name anymore in your where condition, or even when you tell me which columns you want to select, now you will be using the column alias instead of the table name. So let's go ahead and give my books table here an alias. Let's call it B, and the publisher, let's give it the alias P. Now, instead of using books.title, now I will use b.title, and instead of publisher.name, I'll use p.name. Same thing here. Instead of books.publisher.id, I will be using b.pub.id, and instead of publisher pub.id, I will be using p.pub.id. Same thing here. Publisher.name, I'll use p.name. Notice how shorter my select query is becoming, and it will be executing with the same results. No changes happened to the results. We would just give each table here an alias, which made our code shorter. Now, another way to do the join operation is actually to use a keyword called join. Now, using the join keyword will allow you to use the where statement exclusively for giving conditions to the rows that you want to display. So the join keyword, you will use it to tell me which tables you want to join, and then on which column you want to join these tables. So my syntax will be similar to what we had before. We are selecting star, for example, from table 1, and then instead of a comma, we will be using the keyword join, and we are joining it with table 2. And then we will have the join condition after the on keyword, and we will have the foreign key in table 1 equals the primary key in table 2. Now, if these both columns are the same name and they are actually referencing the same actual data, we can use, instead of join, we can use the keyword natural join, and that will allow me to omit the on keyword and the on condition. You can also use the using keyword instead of on, and this will allow you to use the column name if it's the same name. So using and then followed by the column name. So let's rewrite this query again, but instead of using the where condition for our join operation, let's use the keyword join. So instead of doing from books B, comma, publisher P, we'll be using the keyword join. So join, and then we want to have the join condition, which is on, and then instead of the where here, P ID, publisher ID, and P.publisher ID, we can put that on here. So on b.publisher ID equals p.publisher ID, and then our where condition, we want to have the where the p.name is equal to printing is us. You'll see we'll be getting the same result. But now we have the where condition is only being used to filter the rows. Now if I omitted a where condition, it will display all the columns or all the rows in here, so all the books and their publisher names. So to use the join operation, now we are doing the first table, which is our books table, joined with the publisher table, and then we are joining them on the books table.publisher ID equals to the publisher table.publisher ID. Now, if I have them with the same name, pub ID, I can omit this on condition, and instead of using the join keyword, I can use natural join. Now, natural join will look in both tables. It will see what column we have with the same name, and then it will join them according to that column. So you'll have this result. You can also use the keyword using, so join these two columns or join these two tables using, and then in parentheses you'll put the column they have in common, which is pub ID. So that will also give you the same result. Now notice when you are using the natural join or the using keyword, you cannot go ahead and use that. You cannot use that column in your select statement using the column alias. So you cannot go and say p.pubid because that will give you an error. So if we try to run this, we'll get an error which tells me that I cannot have this column and refer to it using one table. So if I want to display it, I will remove the table name or the table alias, and then we will have the publisher ID displayed in here. So if you use the using keyword, this column that you are using in the using keyword, you cannot refer to it using an alias because you know that you have it in common, so you just need to use the name of that column without an alias. Same thing if you use natural join, you will, if you want to display that column, you do not refer to that column using the alias of a table, because we know it's shared amongst two tables or both tables. In this case, you will just use the column name directly.